Thanks for tuning in to Thoughts for Tuesday, hosted by Bates Communications, a podcast series about business trends and leadership insights from the experts.
Hi everyone, I'm Suzanne Bates, CEO of Bates, and today on Thoughts for Tuesday, I'm having a CEO to CEO chat with Ed Kinnaly, CEO of Bauer Hockey, Maverick and Cascade Lacrosse. Now, if you know hockey, you know Bauer, and if you know lacrosse, you know these other performance brands. Now, people who know Ed would say, and I would agree, that he's a very high energy guy. He loves sports. He's known for being a performance-driven leader on and off the field. And I think you might say that's a double entendre because it's all about performance in business as well, and we're going to talk about both today. But we're going to hear the story of how Ed got his start in the business and how he's been able to lead really fast-growing companies and why he left and came back to the same company. Hi, Ed. Great to see you.
Great to be here.
So when we met back when, you were Executive Vice President at Bauer, and we're going to get to that story in a moment about how you left and came back in a minute. But first, I'm just curious how you got your start in the industry. I know you went to Babson College, which is known for business and entrepreneurism, but did you know then you wanted to be in this industry?
I know that I wanted to be in the sports industry. At least I thought I did. In Wellesley, Massachusetts, when I was going to Babson, there was a Nike store, and it was one of the 5 Nike retail stores well before they had Nike Town. So context, this is 1985, and I needed pizza and beer money for college, of course, right? So I walked in and applied for a job. The only thing that I knew back then about Nike was it was this very cool sports brand that had John McEnroe as an endorser, and they were making a lot of waves in the marketplace, and I thought the brand was really cool, and I wanted to be a part of it. So I got hired for $4 an hour, selling primarily running shoes to the local community, and learned a lot about the business, and actually fell in love with retail at that point in my life.
And I know you went on to work at Nike, but before we talk about that, tell me about growing up as a kid. I know you played sports, but I mean, what was your upbringing like? What brought you to this point where you loved sports so much? I grew up
in a sports family. My father was a high school hockey coach in Massachusetts for about 30 years, and so if we weren't going to one of his high school games, we were at his summer hockey camp. He was a school teacher and had the ability to do that. So spent a lot of time in rinks growing up, and I think that really infused my system, my blood, and my psyche with a passion for the sport and everything that it represents.
Did you play any other sports besides hockey?
I ran cross country, I would say moderately successfully. I played football, not successfully at all. And I played golf fairly well until I got to college.
So was your dad your coach, and what was that like? What was it like to have a dad as a
coach?
No.
He, I would say that he was very much a coach, a part of my life, but really never played for him as a hockey player. But obviously admired what he did and what he represented.
So how did playing hockey mostly growing up and other sports you played, how did that shape you, do you think, as a person and as a leader?
I think part of the reason that I'm so attracted to the sport are the values in which hockey personifies. Teamwork is often overused, but I would say that the one thing that you're going to find consistently in the sport of hockey is people that are committed to a common cause, people that are humble in victory as well as defeat, and people that genuinely are kind of willing to go to the ends of the earth to try to help each other out. And it's those qualities that we try to personify here at this company, but absolutely core values of hockey, and it was something that stuck to me. It just felt a lot different than a lot of other sports, with respect, of course, but it just felt different.
Yeah, sure. But when you mentioned the humility, I was thinking about seeing every hockey team from the youth to pros, how they line up at the end and congratulate each other. That doesn't happen in every sport.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, it's a very unique in that regard, very unique sport in that regard, and I think.
And yet viciously competitive at the same time.
But
which
for the
is
right
fascinating.
reasons.
Yeah.
But for the right reasons. I think, when you have guys, you watch the NHL playoffs, and with all due respect to other sports, there's no other postseason sports like the NHL playoffs. When you watch guys diving in front of 100-mile-per-hour slap shots just to block a shot for their team, that's a commitment. Not only, they're not doing that for the glory, they're doing that to help their team win. And that's fairly unique in the world in which we live in today.
So after school, after Babson, did you go to work for Nike right away?
No, I didn't. I for about a year I went and worked for PepsiCo. The former CEO of PepsiCo, a gentleman named Roger Enrico, was a Babson alum, and they did a lot of recruiting on campus. So I got hired by them. Was there for about a year, and I got a call back from Nike that they were making some changes in the store that I used to work at, and asked me to come back and be manager, and ended up diving back into Nike there for a number of years.
So you made your way up in the company then. You didn't stay on the retail side.
No, I didn't. Did a few different things. Spent some time in New York working on the Foot Locker account, which was Nike's largest domestic account at the time. I think they still are. And from there, I went to Beaverton for about 6 years and worked in product management, which is still my passion, product.
So you discovered you were great at product management. What does that mean, and how did you get so good at it?
I'm not sure if I'd use the adjective great, but I would say that I enjoyed it immensely.
What was it about it that you loved?
Well, I think it was probably a convergence of a couple of different things. One, I like industrial design and product just from a passion perspective. I like highly engineered brands and products, and it was something that I was very attracted to on trying to make the ultimate, performance footwear. I think the other thing was that Nike at the time was growing at leaps and bounds, and they were doing it because they weren't redefining an industry; they were actually defining an industry, and it was incredibly liberating. An empowering place to be for somebody, that wasn't too far out of college, to have that as one of their early career paths. And the third place was, I to this day, I still feel incredibly fortunate to have worked for some very, very smart and motivating people in my life out there at Nike. And they taught me a lot about myself, how to think differently, and how to be courageous in business.
What was their secret to that incredible growth that they were having, when you were working there?
I think they really were able to tap into this idea of looking at products as much about performance, but also about the idea of desire. Creating products that people actually covet. We used to have an expression, and we still use it here today, which is, you get somebody in the front door of a store because of a story you've told them. You get them to the wall because they know about the product they're looking for, but you get them to buy the product because they pick it up, they look at it, and they absolutely have to take it home. And that's something that they figured out how to do a long time ago and do it really, really well.
So you came here to Bauer first time around, and I know you were responsible for a great growth spurt here as well. So tell me what happened when you got here. How did you make that happen?
Well, first of all, I was part of a team.
Yes, of course.
That drove a lot of the growth. I spent 2000 to 2003 managing our international business in Europe, and came back here in 2003. When CEO at the time, Chris Zimmerman, asked me to come back. And I had known Chris from Nike. He was an incredibly progressive thinker, was raised in that environment as well. And he was really great at assembling a team of people who not only respected each other, but also was incredibly courageous at how to approach the business. So at the time, we were number 3 market share in most categories. And we figured out very quickly that if we were going to move to number 1, we couldn't try to out Walmart. We couldn't try to out Amazon. We had to pick our own strategy, and we put together some very different at the time strategies to grow our business that included new go-to-market strategies, a revised product merchandising approach. We took our marketing spend and completely blew it up. At that point, we had probably about 80% plus of our marketing spend was going to NHL athletes, and we said, time out, let's take a step back, let's go out and redeploy some of that and talk to the consumer, where they live in the rinks across North America and the world. How do we get product on their feet, let them try it? How do we speak to them a little bit differently and engage them more from a brand perspective in a dialogue as opposed to just talking to them? So there was a bunch of different things that we did, and it involved a lot of people. I just happened to be in charge of global commerce at the time, and we did a lot on the distribution side to make sure that we were putting the company and the brand in a much healthier position. But I had some great colleagues that made the journey that much more worthwhile.
So I know at one point you left Bauer and you went to Flywheel, which is in the spin industry, which was very hot and also getting crowded, I think, by the time you arrived there. Everybody knows SoulCycle was kind of the dominant one in that industry, but how did you go about taking on a giant like that?
Great question. The company is a fantastic company. I was brought on by the chairman, Lou Frankfurt, from Coach, and he at the time was a major investor and a majority shareholder of the company, and we shared a similar vision about disruption and about people first. We looked at SoulCycle as a very formidable competitor, but also a very differentiated competitor from a consumer perspective. And in boutique fitness, to your point, super crowded in some markets like New York, but in a lot of other markets in North America, still a significant amount of opportunity. Look, we just tried to create our own space, to answer your question directly, and to make sure that we understood who our customer was, and make sure that we were giving them the ultimate and high-touch experience, which they absolutely demanded, and we tried to give it to them.
I've heard you describe yourself as a student, and I'm kind of curious about how you define that. I've also heard you say that the best idea wins, which I assume is part of being a student. You've got to figure out what the best idea is. So how do you get people to generate enough ideas, and then how do you decide what the best idea is?
Great question. To me, one of the curiosity is a trait that I put a lot of equity in when we're looking to hire people, and when we put together development programs for their growth. I try to run a flat organization here, and we have my best idea wins is as much about how we deal with each other and we talk to each other as it is about how decisions are made. I want people completely comfortable and having the confidence to speak up in what they feel is right, and I don't care what level of the organization that you're in. In fact, I can tell you right now that some of the best ideas that we've had in the last 15, 16 months as I've been here have been from people that are not VPs. It's just making sure that we are fostering an environment that makes them feel comfortable and empowered and confident enough to speak up.
You know what fascinates me about that is, and I know I've shared some of the research with you, but when we've looked at the data on innovation in our own XPI surveys, what we found is that humility, which includes curiosity, is one of the most important drivers of innovation. And yet a lot of leaders assume that to create an innovative company, they have to be creative or innovative themselves, but that's not the case at all. What they really have to do is be curious about other people's ideas and give people room to bring bad ideas as well as good ideas forward.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think the other piece for me is because particularly the hockey side of our business is so entrenched in kind of rich history, is making sure that we're not letting that rich history kind of hold us back, right? So what else is happening out there in the business world and the consumer world? socioeconomically that we should be thinking about and tapping into when we're trying to define strategies and whether we go right or go left. And we've done it this way forever mentality is not something that I support.
Even though there's a lot of tradition in hockey. But in innovating in hockey, it's different, right?
Yeah, for sure. And look, the tradition piece, we're, a company's over 90 years old, and the tradition of our brand and the tradition of the people that got us here, the respect for the sport that we have, and even our retail community, that's never going to go away. I think the one dynamic that we need to make sure that we're paying the most attention to is our consumer. And the fact that, our target consumer is 12 to 17-year-old kids. And as well as I do, they're so dynamic in what they do and how they think and what they buy, what they don't want to buy, that we need to they're the boss, right? What we did 25 years ago is not the boss. The consumer's the boss. And the day that we take our eye off of that is the day we're in trouble. And when I say, that ultimately is what's going to drive us forward is the whims, the desires, and the needs of our target consumer.
So I promised to get the story from you about leaving and coming back.
Yeah.
What happened? What brought you back, and what are your visions now for the companies?
Yeah, well, I left in 2013. I would just leave it that I think there was some philosophical misalignment between myself and my boss at the time on what was best for the company. I came back in 2017 under new ownership. Company is owned right now by two fantastic entities out of Canada, Fairfax Corporation and Power Corp. Both wonderful institutions. They are buy and hold investors. They are not traditional private equity. And they have given myself and our management team the leeway to make decisions for the long term, not quarter to quarter. And that, I can tell you, is incredibly liberating from a leadership perspective. So what we've been trying to do since I've been back here, and we talked a little bit about this, is really develop organizational confidence again. The company went through a lot economically. The bankruptcy, obviously, but multiple reductions in force, and people came to work every day for a couple of years just trying to keep the lights on and not knowing whether or not they could win. So we've spent a lot of time, and we're still doing it, still spending a lot of time on making people feel like they are empowered and engaged enough to move things forward like we moved them before.
So share with us what you will about the growth strategy. You and I were talking, for example, about the product mix. Mm-hmm. Tell me about how you looked at that differently.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we did was, what I refer to as aligning the pipes, right, and making sure that that our kind of product innovation pipeline, that we had a true consumer in mind for it, that it just wasn't a science experiment. And we have an incredibly talented group of designers, developers, and engineers in Blainville, Quebec. That's our R&D center. It is what I call the Disney World of hockey R&D. And we're happy to, if you're ever up there, to take you through it. But it's a fascinating place with some fascinating people, and they're working on a whole bunch of incredibly highly technical products. On the other side, we have our brand group and our marketing group that sits here in New Hampshire, and they're putting together briefs and business plans and go-to-market strategies that always weren't aligned with what the products that were being worked on. So we kind of took a step back. We put people in a room and we said, all right, again, through the lens of starting with the consumer, let's pressure test whether or not everything that we have here being worked on should be worked on, considering that we have limited amount of capital, human and financial, to spend on.
So to change anything like that at this enterprise level, you really have to get people to think differently and work together differently. So I'm wondering, what are the qualities that you look for in leaders on your team? What are the things they really have to be able to do to bring a company together to start to think differently and work together as an enterprise?
The biggest thing for me is, from a leadership perspective, is having people that can balance multiple thoughts in their head at the same time, or multiple points of view in their head at the same time. And I tell people all the time, it is not a sign of weakness to change your mind. A lot of times people get to director, senior director, VP level, and they think that they have to be, super assertive and always come to the table with the solution. I tell people all the time, my job as CEO is not to make every decision, but it is to make sure that the right decision is made. And that's what I try to drive down through the organization. And that mentality shift, I think, breeds a certain, what I would call openness and dialogue and vulnerability, where people can say, maybe, yeah, you're right, I was wrong. And I think once you start, that starts to infiltrate its way through the organization, magic can happen.
Some CEOs are more comfortable than others when their leadership team gets together and has a good fight. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious about, because I think that's really what you've tried to encourage, respect, but we've got to get it on the table and get it discussed. So how do you do that? How do you encourage that? How do you create the environment for that to happen?
I don't have to create much of it. We are an ultra-competitive company. I can tell you that right now. It is conflict in this company is not a problem. I think the nuance is making sure that it's done respectfully and is done at the right time. I call these meeting rooms the locker room. You can come in here, you can fight all you want, but when the game's over, when you leave, the decision is made. You made a commitment. You may disagree, but the commitment is made that we're moving forward. So the biggest change really is making sure that the conflict ends, as opposed to not having the conflict at all, right? And I don't mind playing judge, jury, and tiebreaker in that regard. That's my job. But people now understand that they can fight and claw all they want, but once a decision is made, game over. Let's roll.
So when you come into a turnaround situation, which is essentially what you did here when you arrived back, how do you balance the short term with the long term? What needs to happen just to keep the lights on, mm-hmm. versus where the company needs to go?
First thing you need to do is establish a vision for what you want the business to be. And we spent a lot of time in the first kind of 9 months working with our different teams across the world to make sure that everybody was bought into what we were trying to do. We established budgets that were very realistic to make sure that we were doing the right things for the marketplace and the business. As I mentioned earlier, we had the ownership team that allowed us to do that. But we also made some very, I think, people would view short-term economic decisions that would be, head scratchers if we were a publicly traded company. For example, we pulled off of Amazon completely, and we didn't allow our customers to sell on Amazon either. We reduced the number of SKUs that we have in our catalog by over 45%. We reduced the number of distribution points in North America by 50%. We put all these policies and programs in place that short-term had I would call a material revenue hit to us, but we knew it was the right thing to do for the business. And we also knew that as a leader in the industry, nobody else was going to do it. We had to do it. It was our obligation. And I'll tell you right now that each one of our employees, including our sales reps, bought into it because they understood what the vision and the payoff was. And we're starting to see it right now. Our retailers, their profitability is up because there's a much better balance of supply and demand in the marketplace. We have better, stronger retailers out there that are making more money for themselves. And we're also, from a consumer perspective, a lot of these retailers are funneling money back into shopping experiences so their consumers get a better benefit and experience out of that as well. So it's a symbiotic relationship that on the surface, short-term looked like it wasn't the best thing to do, but the industry needed it, and we're happy we drove it.
So the business of hockey, mm-hmm. a lot of people think of it as North America, primarily Canada and
Yep.
the U.S.
Yep.
And, maybe there's some areas in Europe and I know China, which is probably a wide open field for you. How do you think about the growth opportunity? What's going on in those markets right now?
I think you have to look at it a couple of different lenses. I think there's, we for the longest time have been a company that have been really focused on selling hockey equipment, and that's great, but just think about us as somebody that's really tapped into, the 365-day-a-year psyche of the hockey crazy kid, and what else are they doing? What else are they spending money on? How many other ways are they accessing hockey? So there's a lot of opportunity to grow our business just outside of the core hard goods equipment that we're starting to really think about right now. That's number one. Geographically, you mentioned before, we're seeing slightly stronger growth in the U.S. than Canada right now for a variety of different reasons. Internationally, Russia's been a wonderful market for us. And we're trying to crack the code in China, which I think everybody in our industry is trying to do. Canada with over 5,000 rinks across the country, at a fraction of the population of China, and China with about 175 rinks. So We've got a small infrastructure challenge there, but we're working on some things.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about how, decades ago you bought a new pair of skates or you bought a new stick because they wore out or broke.
Right.
And it's a different marketplace today, and you use the term surprise and delight. What do you mean by that?
Well, look, when I was growing up playing hockey, I got a new pair of skates because my feet grew, and I got a new pair of gloves because my palms were ripped out or I couldn't use them anymore, or my stick broke, and that was what I call kind of the utility purchase dynamic. Part of the other thing that we did when we were going through our big growth spurt was we said, how do we shift the dynamic from being utility to being more of a, instead of I have to get a new pair because I outgrew it or it broke, to I want a new pair. So there's this notion of creating, back to this product being coveted piece that we're spending a lot of time thinking about now. And the only way to do that is to really understand the consumer and what drives them from a purchase perspective. And a lot of it is performance, but a lot of it is what the product actually means to them.
So I'm guessing you don't usually disclose who you root for in hockey and lacrosse. Is that right?
I don't, but in this case, I'll tell you, I'm a huge Bruins fan. I grew up in the Bobby Orr era, and that'll never go away.
Yeah. It happens when you're a kid, doesn't it?
For
That's
sure.
when you fall in love with sports and with a team. And
For sure.
Yeah, a lot of people, it's a lifelong passion. Just as we're closing out, any advice that you would have for CEOs, especially those who are in a situation you've been in? You've been in fast-growing businesses, and you've been in businesses where there's significant headwinds. What do you wish you'd known 5 or 10 years ago?
Great question. I would say don't underestimate the value of good people, plain and simple. You can have the best strategy in the world, but unless you have people not only that are aligned behind it, but truly in their heart and soul believe in it, you're not going to get anywhere. So I think that is, and I look back on why I'm so passionate about this company here, and my time even back at Nike, and that was an absolute common thread between the two, which is it's not so much a business, it's really a mission that you're on, and that shift in mentality, I think, has an immense amount of power to it. So.
Ed Kinnaly, CEO of Bauer and Maverick and Cascade, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.